Welcome, everyone. For those of you who are unfamiliar with LDS Earth Stewardship, or if this is your first time, LDS Earth Stewardship is a nonprofit organization that strives to honor the Creator by living and testifying of gospel principles of Earth stewardship. Through educational forums and service opportunities, we hope to help every Latter-day Saint be a steward of the earth. And Company of Stewards is one of the ways that we do that. We're excited, really thrilled and honored to learn from Joe Richardson tonight, who is a true steward of the earth in word and in deed. I'll introduce Joe briefly. Joe Richardson founded Mountainside Education and Enrichment, the nonprofit parent organization to the Out of Landfills program. Last summer, he presented on the program alongside Daniel Cooney, the UN Director of Communications for the Environment, and Jonathan Foley, the Executive Director of Project Drawdown. Joe has served widely, contributing to the Environmental and Sustainable Rotary Action Group, the Maryland Association of Environmental and Outdoor Education Association, the Frederick County Sustainability Commission, and the Monocacy and Catoctin, did I get those names right, Joe?
Monocacy, that's right. You did pretty well.
Oh, thanks. Watershed Alliance. At the heart of his service is a vibrant testimony of the restored gospel and our role as stewards of the creation. Joe served as the bishop in the Gaithersburg First Ward from 2006 to 2013. And I am happy to turn the time over to Joe for tonight.
Well, I'm so grateful to be here. It's always rewarding to have the opportunity to talk to people who have concerns about the environment. I probably have learned more in the last 12 years with respect to the environment and our impact and the carbon footprint and human impact on what's happening to our planet than I learned in the previous 52. So if you do the math, I'm 64. As Carly had mentioned, I served as a bishop from 2006 to 2013. And I basically released myself by moving to this facility in Maryland. It's a 115-acre farm in Frederick, Maryland. It's the central part of the state. We run summer camps. We run before and after school programs. Those after school programs are on pause for a little bit, and summer camps will be resuming this year. Our goal is to connect people and mostly children to the natural world. And we really create community where kids can flourish. But over the past 12 to 15 years, I've learned more about the environment, and I was always concerned about the environment. And I like the term, instead of an environmentalist, I think earth steward is probably better. I've always puzzled when I think of myself as owning this farm, because this property was here since the beginning of the earth. I took over stewardship, is a better word, in 2002. And my mantra has always been, leave it better than you found it. I've seen people who haven't been worthy stewards of land in the past, people who own homes that don't really take care of them. And the mantra has always been, leave it better than you found it. But I've had the opportunity in the past few years to learn a lot more about our impact and to try to expose people, adults, children, to how we can minimize the adverse impacts and actually take steps to improve the well-being of ourselves, our future, and our children. I'll go ahead and start by sharing the screen. I want to make sure that you have this. So again, I gave a little bit of story. As with this organization and it's so refreshing. I talk to a lot of students, and it's nice to be able to really begin with a spiritual message. As a temple ordinance worker, I was always intrigued where Adam was counseled to bless this garden and take good care of it. And that always resonated with me, that he was given this wonderful garden to live in, and he was to take care of it and to be a good steward. And that same commandment is given to us. And I think if we take a look at ourselves and what we've been doing to the planet ever since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, I kind of question, have we really been good stewards, or can we do a better job? And I think the answer is sort of a present a piece which you may all be familiar with, environmental stewardship and conservation. And we're committed to even the preface, the earth and all things on it are creations of God. As beneficiaries of this divine creation, we should care for the earth, be wise stewards over it, and preserve it for future generations. The earth and all things on it are part of God's plan for his redemption of his children and should be used responsibly to sustain the human family. I have these concerns as I see some of the environmental impacts, that the retreating ice cap, polar ice cap, and the fires and some of the crazy storms that we're seeing, that I have a concern for the well-being of my grandchildren. And I want to always be, if my grandchildren were ever to ask me, Granddad, why didn't you do more? Did you know this was happening? I want to be able to answer to them that I did everything that I could and tried to share that with others. Also in that description, it talks about what it means to be a good steward, and God has made us accountable for the care and preservation of the earth and the wise use of its resources. As stewards, we avoid complacency and excessive consumption, using only what is necessary. We make our homes, neighborhoods, and cities beautiful. We preserve resources and protect for future generations. So that is really so much of what drives me and what I think about. See if I can go ahead and advance this. So this is a very small picture of a section of my property. I have a 115-acre farm in Frederick, Maryland. Obviously, you can see I have a 10-kilowatt wind turbine. We put 74 kilowatts of solar on the campus, but it's really an environmental institution. We have wetlands in the back. I have ball fields, and it's a great environment to connect kids and our community and people to the natural world. And it's been a process. When I first purchased this property, it was run down. The brick building in the foreground was built in 1843. I wouldn't let my dog sleep in that house when we first purchased it. We've done a lot of renovations, and the farm was neglected and overrun. And my mantra is like, I'm going to leave this place better than I found it, and hopefully others will be able to prosper as well. So things I wanted to, this is a quote that I've come up with. There's a lot of great quotes, but I think when it comes to some of the circumstances we're experiencing in the earth today are excessive consumption, not processing our waste products in a sustainable way, is that in a large part, we are willfully ignorant of the impacts that we're having on a planet. And it's no longer okay to not know exactly how extensive those impacts are. I mentioned those are the quotes I gave just a few minutes ago. But in 2018, I had an opportunity to attend a symposium at the National Geographic. Catherine Wilkinson, a very articulate individual, was a spokesperson for Project Drawdown. Project Drawdown, if you're not familiar with it, was a book that was produced in 2017, and it's a comprehensive plan to reverse global warming and to circumvent climate change. As part of this symposium, Kate Marvel and other brilliant people were in attendance, and Catherine Wilkinson introduced the concept of being a solutionist. When she talked about, in this quote that you can see, to identify what our roles and responsibilities, and we can be astonished at how profound an impact each of us can have. And and when I think about even Greta Thunberg, this young girl from Sweden who single-handedly sat in front of the Swedish parliament and protested climate change, what has happened there, and how she was in 2 short years able to address the European Union, the United Nations. She was Time Magazine's Person of the Year, and she's nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. When I stopped being a bishop, and when you're a bishop, you spend an awful lot of time not only in meetings and in activities for the ward, but you spend a lot of mental energy on the well-beings of the members. When I was released, it was like, okay, Heavenly Father, what do you want me to do now? And I like to think that every action we've been taking since that time is a reflection of what what Heavenly Father's plan is for me. So with Project Drawdown, there are originally 80 solutions to climate change, and a lot of those things have to do with renewable energy, education, efficient land use. But 31% of the solutions that we can integrate have to do with food production and food waste. When we take organic material and bury it in a landfill, it breaks down into methane gas, which is 80 times more potent than carbon emissions. So if we were to take that material that becomes an off gas and compost it, it becomes a valuable commodity. So I like to think of, in Maryland is called America in miniature. We have a lot of features found throughout the country. Now, our mountains are small. The Appalachian Mountain Range is minuscule in comparison to Colorado, to Colorado and the Rockies. But we have mountains, we have the ocean, we have beaches, we have flatlands similar to the plains, we have Chesapeake Bay. So Maryland has often been called America in miniature. I like to think of what I've done at Bartee Mountainside as Drawdown in miniature. Of some of the solutions that we have incorporated on this property or in the process of incorporating on the property have to do with the wind turbine that you see, reducing food waste. We are going to, in the photograph that you see, we had land in corn and crop production. We've taken all that land out of conventional crop production, and we're working on regenerating the soils, increasing the biodiversity of the soils. And we'll integrate several practices. We'll do silvopasturing. We'll have conservation agriculture. We'll be engaged in other regenerative agricultural practices. So I'm proud of the fact that we've been able to incorporate in a 115-acre property so many of the solutions that have been outlined. Wanted to show, this is a photograph of the building that we constructed. It is one of the most sustainable buildings that you can find in the region. It was constructed with SIPS panels. What you're seeing here is we have radiant heat, which is basically a passive heat. We run this PEX tubing, 4,000 feet of PEX tubing through what is a concrete slab thermal mass. And then we work to heat and cool that. And when you, in the wintertime, when you walk across the floor in this building, you want to do it barefoot because it's warm. And it only takes 60 gallons of water to heat that 4,000 feet of PEX tubing. And once it's heated, it takes a long time for it to cool down. So it's incredibly efficient. The picture to the right is the geothermal loop. So we installed 3 pumps to pump water through in our geothermal structure. I've got a picture of, this is the pump that we have. We installed inverters and lithium-ion batteries to back up our power. So we'll never be without power, but it's solar generated. And we use composting toilets. Instead of flushing toilets, every time you flush a toilet, it's 1.5 gallons of water. By using composting toilets at our facility, we estimate that we save or do not contaminate as many as 1 million gallons of water on our facility alone. The building was SIPS panel construction, structure and insulated panels. It's an incredibly tight envelope. So it takes very little energy to heat and cool it. If we have an extraordinarily cold day, I have a heat-later fireplace. And very often when we light that fireplace, it gets so warm in this building because it's so tight that we almost have to open windows even if it's 9 degrees outside. So one of the important features as we try to minimize our carbon footprint is to have building efficiency, to be as efficient as we possibly can. Other practices that we've engaged in this conservation agriculture, we have an acre of deer protected gardens. We connect kids to their food sources. Even our summer camp, we have a program that is a specialty camp that's, we call it Harvest Camp. And it's amazing how many kids are not familiar with where food comes from and how it's grown and how much better it tastes when you don't need to use all these chemicals to help it grow, and it grows naturally. So conservation agriculture is a part of what we do. We're also very fortunate to, as a non-formal education partner, we're able to get a $1.3 million grant to do a stream restoration. We have a 10-acre wetland in the back of our property, which if you look at the pictures on the far left, the stream was badly incised. Every time we had a significant rain event, we were getting a lot of bank erosion. It was getting worse. The entire stream was reconfiguring itself. And under normal circumstances, a stream bank might erode 2 or 3 inches a year. Ours was, we put bank pins in and measured it. We were losing 2 or 3 feet a year. So much sediment was flushing down into the Monocacy River, ultimately in the Potomac, and subsequently in the Chesapeake Bay. So we got a substantial grants, and they did this incredible stream restoration last winter. And you can see the pictures to the right, how the stream was completely reconfigured. A lot of that historic sediment was removed and used to dam up other areas, other tributaries on the property. It's really a remarkable restoration, and it's a great teaching opportunity for students. But a lot of what I want to talk about is, this is wonderful that I'm doing these practices on my property, and I want to walk the talk. We produce our own energy, we grow our own food, we compost our own waste, both human and food waste. We try to demonstrate when students or anybody comes onto our property, we want to show there's a different way to do things. There's a different way to build buildings. I'm proud of the fact that building I showed you cost about $750,000. If I did a pole barn, an inefficient building, it would have cost me maybe $100,000 less. But with all the energy conservation and the solar panels and the energy storage, we have no electric bill. One of the beauties of doing this installation is that I'm saving anywhere from $15,000 to $18,000 a year on energy consumption, because I produce all my energy and store it. So everything any additional expense has been compensated by the savings of the building. But I want to talk a little bit about food waste composting and a program that I've instituted in some schools that I'm hoping will spread. These 2 slides came from the World Wildlife Fund, and many of you know that so much of the food that we produce in the United States is wasted. It's wasted going fallow in the fields where it's grown. It's wasted and lost in transportation. And shockingly and unwisely, a lot of the food that is perfectly edible when it gets to the grocery store is not put out for display because it has some spots and that sort of thing. So much food, even before it gets to us, is disposed of when there are so many people hungry. But once it gets home, it is common for 15 to 25% of the food that we purchase is wasted. And I would challenge any of you to think about your bread basket and what you bought in the grocery store, and think about how much of those items you threw out that you didn't get to eat. I'm a huge fan of Costco. I love getting bulk purchases. I'll buy a bag of avocados that are like baseballs. I have to wait 5 or 6 days for them to soften. And by the time I get around to eating the 4th or 5th avocado, they've rotted. I don't know how many loaves of bread in a very humid climate that we have here in Maryland that I've thrown away because it's moldy. And I would have each of you maybe reflect on what your food waste issues may be. In the old days, we would go to the market every day. We would buy what we need. If we couldn't grow it, we would acquire that, but there was no way to preserve it. We didn't have refrigeration. We didn't have freezers to keep this food. And so often I'll have things in the freezer for several years and end up throwing it away. Oh dear, what did I just hit? Let me go back. I think, let me figure out what I just did. Zoom share. Okay. So if I can go to the next slide. So I'm going to give you some statistics which don't really mean a lot. When you talk about 124 million tons of food, I don't really understand what that looks like. And I know it's a really big number, but much of this ends up going to landfills. And I had mentioned before, it ends up breaking down into methane gas instead of being composted and becoming a great commodity. Of the 2 drawdown solutions, reducing food waste and composting are among them, and they're within easy reach. We know that I have a backyard composter here. I now have a composting operation on my facility, but I can take from my house, I take my fruits and vegetables and other things, and I have put them in a tumbler. Much of what I can't put meat items and a lot of dairy products in that tumbler because it could attract vermin and smell, and I don't do it properly. But commercial composting and the operations that we've been working with schools, anything that you could eat, potato chips, cookies, apples, pizza, pepperonis, all of that can be composted and become a organically rich material. So we began a program called Out of Landfills. And some of the key objectives were to do several things. It was to, first off, try to reduce the use of single-use plastics in schools. You know, we get these Glad sandwich bags, we put our lunches in them, and those bags are not recyclable and constitute a good portion of the waste stream. There are options that parents who, once we get back to school, and some of the communities you're at, you are back. In Maryland, we're in a hybrid, but we had this year-long hiatus from school, which hopefully will be over and schools will be back to what we would consider as normal in the future. But a lot of times we could use bento boxes or compostable materials or reusable bags to put the food in and limit the use of single-use plastics, to compost the food scraps, to recover uneaten food. And especially in our society now with the pandemic and so much unemployment, there are more hungry people that need to be fed than ever before. And then also to decontaminate our recycling. I think recycling has been very confusing. Much of what we're told is recyclable, in fact, is not. I think that even most citizens just don't really know what's recyclable, and because China's not taking it, and the commodity markets have dropped, there's some disinterest in recycling, and that's not a good step to take. So one of the things we need to do is in schools, we need to secure a compost collection facility or network. We need to get buy-in from the school administrators. We want to do food recovery or institute share tables. Share tables are going to be very difficult to institute with COVID. Kids are not going to be allowed to share apples if they didn't eat it. We want to identify funding options, get a staff champion from within the school administration, and then most importantly, to engage students. So these are some of the other objectives that we were trying to establish. So in the schools, we instituted a couple of waste sorts. At Urbana Sugarloaf, we had 12 kids from the Hawks Club volunteer to strap on gloves. And after lunch, the last lunch period one day, we asked building services to set aside 3 trash bags, which we promptly dumped on the floor, and then had the kids pick through and sort everything that they could put into an appropriate bin. So if there was a bin for organics, there was a bin for recycled material, there was an area for uneaten food to be collected, and we sorted all this, and we saw that we could divert up to 85% of the waste. We did this in a number of schools. This was a picture from Brunswick High School. The young man in the foreground was a 5th grader from Monocacy Elementary School. And I had one child go, this is so disgusting, I think I'm gonna throw up. And it's like, well, throw up in the compost container, we can use that. This young man was like, let's dump a couple more out. Let's do some more of this. They were so enthusiastic. And the photograph of the kids in the foreground just gives you an indication of the power of young people and how quickly and easily they can be. Container is a compostable bag. You have recycling, trash, and we also have a liquids bin. So there's, again, we were operating in 14 schools in Montgomery County, 8 schools in Frederick County in Maryland. It's spreading rapidly. And I just wanted to give you some data that came from the waste sorts. We were only sorting through a fraction of the waste. Most of these schools might produce 200, 250 pounds of waste. The bags that we weighed totaled 102 pounds, 104 pounds. But after the sort, you could see how much we were beginning to divert. 51% was organic material. In an elementary school, kids don't eat what they're served. Parents fight with their children over what they're going to eat for dinner. They fight with them over breakfast. They don't fight with them at lunchtime in the school because they don't see what the kids don't eat. And the kids are smart enough not to bring the food home so they don't get in trouble. I actually had a child say, hey, why don't you take that apple home? No, my mom will yell at me for not eating it. So they just throw it away. And we'd see so much. What was also striking is how much weight and was in the liquids just by simply pouring out an unopened bottle of milk or a partially drunk Gatorade, we were eliminating 24 pounds of waste out of the waste stream. And this is what we began to see, which really began to open our eyes. What you see in the waste sorts from Brunswick Middle School, Brunswick Elementary Valley, and Urbana was uneaten food items that we picked out of the trash. At the time, we had nothing we could do with that food. I had a gentleman from my Rotary Club took the fruits and slopped his pigs with it. The milks we ended up having to pour out and recycled. Everything else went into the trash. But this was a telling story because what you see here was a fraction of the overall waste load for the day. We emptied 2 or 3 bags out of the waste stream, but there were 10 to 12 bags total from the cafeteria that day. So first, I began to notice glaringly how much food was being wasted. And this kind of ties in with Sister Eubanks' talk, and I was going to mention this to you. Sister Eubanks gave a talk last year, and she mentioned to love God is to love each other. We cannot waste what other people need. Now, in modern times, it's hard not to waste things. We are set up in a disposable society. But there are ways we can minimize waste so that others may thrive. And part of what emerged out of Out of Landfills, we wanted to start what was called a compost program. We call it now a waste diversion program. We would roll these programs out, and some of the schools would allow me to go into the cafeteria. We'd have assemblies where kindergarten and first grades would come in. We would show them what we were doing, why we were doing it, and gave kids the opportunity to place the right item in the right bin. So if a child came up with a sandwich in a bag, it's like, well, put the sandwich in the compost bin, but take it out of the plastic bag first and throw that in the trash. We had great help from community partners. I was a president of my Rotary Club, and Rotary was enormously helpful in providing some initial funding. And then we had Rotarians volunteer in the cafeterias to help these kids every day for the first 2 weeks to make sure the kids understood what went where, to help them sort things properly. They picked it up quickly. Within 4 days, the elementary kids had it. And this is a sample of what the bins look like. You got your trash, you have a recycle, you have your compost, and a liquids bin. And we got a sieve so that if kids dumped yogurt or fruit chunks in the liquids, we were able to capture that. And we were able to dispose of the liquids in the mop sink. Now, some schools may say you can't do that. It's a grease trap. What we would have the building services do is to dilute it. So dilution is the solution to pollution. If you're worried about grease traps and that sort of thing, run a hose in that bucket while you're emptying it out, and it dilutes it. It becomes harmless and it's easily disposed of. Much more intelligent and efficient than sending it to a landfill. This is a perfect example of what trash typically look like. And for anybody who would think about maybe adopting this, I challenge you to, when visitors are allowed in the schools, when the pandemic is over, to observe what the waste stream looks like. Because prior to our introducing this program, the blue recycle bin was just a different color trash can. The recycle bin looked just like the trash did. As you can see in this middle picture, there are recycled materials, there's food materials, ketchup packets. You've got everything that a child's going to throw away in one container. All of that, even in the recycling bins, if they're so badly contaminated, end up going to the landfill. This is what it looked like afterwards. After 2 weeks, this is a photograph I took from the waste stream in Lincoln Elementary School, where what was recycled was strictly the water bottles, milk bottles that you see here. In Frederick County, we're very limited on what they'll accept for recycling. So most of it was these containers. The Pringles plastic containers is not recyclable. They weren't accepting the Lunchable plastic trays, which should be recyclable. So we were limited, but the stream was clean. And then we had the compost bin, which had no organics in it. And that's really critical. You can't have a program where a commercial composter is going to pick this up and deal with straws and ketchup packets and plastic bags. So you're seeing a really pristine waste stream here. But if you notice what I do, there are an awful lot of uneaten apples in that compost bin. And this was something that became really glaring to us and something that we wanted to remedy. We had students, I pictured here, this Hawks Club would go into the cafeteria at the end of the last lunch period every day. Building services would leave the trash bags off in a corner where these students collected it, weighed it, They recorded the data, uploaded the information, and they did it every day. At this particular school in January, we started this program in January 2019. There were 12 kids in the Hawks Club. By the end of the year, there were 84. And they stretched down to as young as second graders. And this was the data that we uncovered in Urbana Sugarloaf Elementary School. This was the story that we needed to tell that had the program grow. From January to June, they produced 19,000 pounds of trash. But we were able to divert 9,700 pounds of it as organic material. 4,100 pounds of it was liquid. Simply by pouring the liquids out into a bucket and dumping it, we eliminated 4,000 pounds that would have been landfill designated. We came up with 2,100 pounds of very clean, uncontaminated recycling. So we went from what was previously 19,000 pounds of trash to 2,900. It was one school. And this was a story I was able to present to the school board, and they began to allow more pilots. What's encouraging is when we reopen, there are municipalities throughout the state that are ready and willing to institute this program. I have a data sheet that it's a little mundane, but data was really critical. And Out of Landfills, we want any school that's participating in this program to upload their spreadsheets to us. We want to be able to monitor if we're seeing variations. Is this waste issue the same in Maryland as in the state you live in? Would this be typical of a cafeteria in Utah or Arizona or Ohio or Texas? I challenge you that it probably is, especially in the United States, maybe not so much in other countries. But we were collecting data on all these schools, and the story was consistent across the board, anywhere from 84 to 79% of waste diverted. The other really compelling thing that I wanted to share was food recovery. So what we had told kids to do is in the cafeteria, once a food item is issued, whether it's a fruit, apple, banana, a fruit cup, a milk, once it's handed to a child, they can't take it back. Early on, I collected some beautiful bananas. I gave it back to the food services. I said, hey, why don't you save these and use these for the next class? And they're like, we can't. I'm like, what do you mean you can't? It's like, it's a federal mandate. We can't do that. So the kids honestly cannot take the food they've been issued back if they don't eat it. So their only choice is to throw it away. It's critical. This food can't sit around for a couple of days or even a couple of hours. So the only option is to dispose of it. So at Lincoln Elementary School, which is a Title I school, it's a financially distressed community. I expected to see less food waste. We actually saw more. I was in the school probably 10 times in the fall of 2019. And we were telling kids, listen, open your milk, pour it out, put the cap back on, throw it in the recycle bin. But I saw so many kids doing this. I finally got a hunch, and I got Mike Bernitsky, who's pictured in the middle of that photograph in the middle on the left. He's a member of the school board. Alicia Mason-Fuhr is very involved in Farm to School. And one day we talked to the principal of building services and said, hey, listen, when the kids come up, we want them not to pour their milk out. We're going to put it in a cooler. And we wanted to see how much we got. So the photograph to the left, there were 58 milks that day. There were some kids I didn't get to before they opened it up. Once it opened up, I couldn't use it. But we took it to a Frederick Rescue Mission, was 4 blocks away. I didn't actually know what I was going to do with this once we collected all this, but I knew that there was a rescue mission nearby. So Alicia and I went over there and said, can you use this? I said, of course we can. He said, where'd you get this from? I'm like, Lincoln Elementary School, right over there, walking distance. And they're like, is this a week's worth? I went, no, this is a day. So they asked us, I said, look, if we dropped a cooler off on the loading dock at 10 o'clock in the morning and came back and picked it up at 2 o'clock, would the students be willing and the building services be willing to participate in that program? Now, we want kids to drink their milk. Please drink your milk. If you have it, please drink it. But if you're not going to drink it, put it in the cooler. The picture to the right, I actually went in the cooler one day. It was so full, I pulled everything out. There were 76 milks that day. And again, this is a day in a food distressed community. And if you, in the course of 38 days, we collected 2,508 milks, almost 1,000 pieces of fresh fruit from one school. If you calculate that out to 180-day school year, one school was disposing of 11,500 milks a year that were unopened. It's like, we've sacrificed efficiency and logic we've sacrificed for efficiency, logic, and stewardship to have this much being disposed of. It is easy to estimate that in the Frederick County public school system, which has 40 elementary schools, they could be disposing of as many as 400,000 milks unopened in the trash. Now that goes to a landfill. That's not recyclable. If the bottle's full, you can't recycle that. So that's just waste that's going to a landfill. The county also adopted compostable trays. So it's like, okay, wait a minute, don't throw that in the trash. Let's shred that and make that an organic material. So these are some of the things. And then we wanted to really recognize and acknowledge the efforts of all these wonderful kids, and they were acknowledged by the Sustainability Commission. So again, trying to do this, and I have to watch my time because I know we're already at 9:40, is, start by looking at what's in the waste stream. Do what you can. The easiest things, even without a commercial compost entity, we can recover packaged food and donate it. If there is a commercial composting company that collect this, the schools can do it, but again, they can only compost fruits and vegetables. So a lot of the food items cannot be processed, and they still end up going in the trash. So these are some of the things that you can kind of think about. We have a toolkit that has all the data and how to start a program. There is a couple of other things I wanted to mention. They're great partners. And Kiss the Ground, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, if there isn't anybody who can do a commercial compost operation, ILSR can train anyone to become a commercial composter, and you can begin operations like that. Interfaith Power and Light is a great organization of faith members who want to do things to help their communities. Certainly Project Drawdown. And as a Rotarian, I had an opportunity at president-elect training. I met Mark Maloney, who was the Rotary International president in 2019. And I pictured him, I handed him a copy of book Drawdown. I said, Mark, we have to make climate an area of focus. We have to put emphasis on climate change. I want you to see this book. A month later, Rotarian magazine had climate solutions within our reach, and they cited 7 of the Drawdown solutions. And in January of 2020, I was featured in the Rotarian magazine. So Rotary is one of those community partners that can either help with funding, help with citizen support. This was the World Environment Day thing that I participated in. And Rotary has clubs within schools called Interact or Rotaract that can help mobilize students. And if I can leave with one other comment, is that so many young people are concerned with the future, concerned with climate change. There's activism. They've got the Friday Strikers and other groups of activism. I want to try to get these kids to become solutionists, to give them measurable, actual projects that can minimize the carbon footprint. When kids begin to compost, that they can get into, well, why isn't this recyclable, and why is all this plastic being labeled such, and they can get into other issues beyond that. But young people, I don't do any of this without teaching. Truly, I think that the solution, if we're going to head off this climate crisis that we're looking at, the people who are going to save it are not going to be a gray-haired old man like me. It's going to be young people. I'm hoping, we're getting kids involved in schools from Rotaract clubs. I'd love to see church youth groups begin to look at options, things that they can do in their schools, in their communities. What can we do more efficiently? It's not just food. It can be, should we start putting solar panels on our buildings? Can we make our buildings more efficient? There's lots of questions. Most importantly, the idea behind Lunch Out of Landfills was, let's teach kids in schools how to minimize and sort waste, and then have them go home and teach their parents. And what I see is sort of leadership in reverse, or in the way that it's going to be. And it's like, kids are going to save the planet. Kids are going to lead the charge. Kids are going to teach us. So with that, I think I'll probably wrap this up. And, Carly, if you can field some questions, if anybody has some, I hope I didn't drone on and bore anybody.
Thank you so much, Joe. You prepared so well, and the work you have done is absolutely inspiring, that you've led the initial charge that will hopefully ripple and lead generations of charges and helping move things forward. And we love your solutionist perspective.
What was really exciting, and please let's ask some questions, but I remember those first kids in Urbana. I said, listen, this is a yucky job. There's nothing glamorous about it. There's nothing nice about trash. Nobody wants to do what you volunteered to do, but you might just be changing the world. And that seemed like a bit of a stretch. But that one school became 14, 18 schools the following year. I have Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, other communities looking at the data we've collected and saying, we have to do this too. Our goal is to have this spread throughout the state. And if this is symptomatic of every other school system across the country, whether you call it lunch out of landfills, waste aversion, whatever it is, we need to change behaviors. We need to change our fundamental understanding of what we're doing and what our impacts are. And when you send something to the landfill, what happens to it? But we're so much of the society that I put that waste bin out on the curb and it magically gets emptied once a week, and it's out of sight and it's out of mind. But it goes somewhere and there's enormous environmental impacts where it goes, and we need to start understanding what that is.